things I got from reading Point Man. I've dug into a bunch of different books about being a dad of girls, and that's all I can apparently make is girls. And I started to read into that and trying to figure out how does a dad influence his daughters positively, and I'm learning that's even more important than I thought. It's sometimes more important than the mother in some cases. And one of the biggest things I found is being there is probably one of the most important things. Being present, and not just physically present, being mentally present, being involved, being engaged. You know, they did some studies years back how babies that listened to classical music tended to have better reading and better learning abilities, and they could do all these different things. And my wife was in child care development, and it was funny because the first reports that was it. If they listen to classical music, they're going to be better in all these areas. And then they dug a little deeper, and they said it wasn't that they necessarily listened to classical music. It was that the parents took the time to play them classical music and were more involved in their life. Does that make sense? Like I didn't just as an absent father go put on some Beethoven and walk away, right? You know, I didn't even think to do that at that point. And so we're talking about being there and being involved in their life. And in the book here, he talks about there's two strategies that tend to happen from a negative side that try and pull us away from our kids and from developing men of the future and from developing different gentlemen that can lead this country as we move forward. And he said the two biggest strategies that the opposition tries to take is the first one is they try and put a wedge between you and your spouse. Right? Who in here has watched the divorce rates climb? And they're staggering. And it's not just in the normal world now, it's in the churches and everywhere. The same divorce rates are running rampant all over the place. And they're trying to figure out what's going on with that. Well, that's one of the things. Is if we can separate the husband and wife and get them on two different pages, we can totally disrupt the household. And if you disrupt the household, that disrupts everything. Right? And suddenly, and like I said, I'm a prime example of that. When it disrupted my parents, they ended up in divorce. And here now they're both chasing after, trying to make ends meet, working all the time, and had no time for us kids and no time to impart anything on us. The other strategy that they do is they try and get between the father and the children. Right? If they can work a wedge in between the father and children, and here's where you hear so much when you listen to these materials and you're starting to learn these different, strategies to live a better life. And you really start to learn that sometimes good is the enemy of great. Sometimes chasing after things that get in the way of the calling that we have to be dads can sometimes interrupt our lives and not be an important thing to chase. I mean, how common is it to see a dad that chases a career and ignores his family? Right? It's kind of a tricky one, isn't it? I remember when I first became an entrepreneur and I started putting time into business, it was interesting how I had a responsibility to fend for my family and support my family, yet I had a responsibility to lead my family, and they seemed to conflict each other. Until I learned, I love what life represents in those 8 F's that we talk about, because the goal is to live a balanced life in all of them. Isn't that the goal? It's to find out where you're lacking, where you can use things, and try and find a way to balance out those 8 F's. And yeah, there's going to be times in your life where maybe you get a little off track and you have to, there's a little bit of time. But ultimately, we're trying to balance all those things. So I think when you're talking about being a father is a privilege, I was reading in another book the other day, said it was interesting how it used to be fathers stayed responsible and stayed around because there was a sense of responsibility, a sense of honor in being a good dad. When I got this topic, I thought privilege versus responsibility. And I think if you're all here tonight, obviously you came out here, you're responsible, you're learning to personally grow your stuff, but I think it goes a little bit bigger into there being a privilege to being able to influence these young children, to be able to influence and be a dad, and actually pour yourself into their life. And so I want to go back to that one moment when I was holding my daughter and I started to realize, it's important. Here I had this life that's a completely blank slate. And I thought, what a privilege, because if you think farther, who in here read Orrin's 13 Resolutions? Right? And he talks about Jonathan Edwards in that book and how he gave resolutions. And I was reading this Point Man book, and it talks about, here's Jonathan Edwards was a pastor, a writer, a president of Princeton, and him and his wife had 11 children. Right? Somewhere along the way, he was probably pretty busy as a pastor, a writer, president of Princeton, but yet he found a way to have 11 children. And listen to what he did. He didn't just have children and be an absent father. He had children and he actually went out there, and I'm sure he was there and invested time in them, and he created a legacy for himself. And look at the lineage that came from Jonathan Edwards. More than 300 of the children became pastors, missionaries, or theological professors. 120 were professors at universities. 110 became attorneys. 60 were prominent authors. 30 were judges. 14 served as presidents of universities or college, 3 served in U.S. Congress, 1 became vice president of the United States. Can you imagine it? The weight, I read that, I'm like, man, the weight of me, it's like, look what he created. And he didn't do that just by being the dad of those children. He actually invested into their lives. He actually developed these kids and helped them grow into who they were to become. And it's so cool because being the privilege of being a father, I thought when we're here, we're holding this innocent little baby. And before I got involved in this and studied any of the 8 F's, I thought it's kind of like, here I have this little baby that I now get to program. It's kind of like a computer. Not really. For your guys, so you can relate. And I thought, man, it's like a blank slate, a computer. When you get first buy a computer and you only have a couple of things on the, what is that called, the Windows? Has anybody had one for like 5 years? Now it's covered in stuff. Right? Now there's junk all over it, and some programs you wish you wouldn't have put on there, and some you wish you would have, and all those different things. I remember thinking, a baby's kind of like a blank program that I get that I can program, and I'm responsible for it. But then I learned a little bit about the faith side, and I realized, nope, they're actually born messed up. They come with viruses and stuff, like sin, right? And so it's not just good enough to be there and be present. We actually have to coach and educate and help these children know between right and wrong. I mean, we all have a conscience that we kind of learn these things, but it's our job as dads to develop these things.